Shabbat Shalom, everyone, on this last Shabbat of summer. I want to take a look at the very end of our Parsha. If you want to open your Chumashim up for a moment, we'll skip through, as I said, the disturbing parts of our Parsha, that we have this tochacha in our Parsha, in Parashat Ki Tavo, this list of curses. And we also have blessings, but we don't focus on the blessings because it really is the polar extremes. All these wonderful things that will happen to us if we follow God's ways, walk in God's ways, continue this covenant, and the most disturbing of curses if we stray off this path. And we know, all right, from a historical context, the book of Deuteronomy comes much later, but if we look at Torah in a chronological context, that Moshe is towards the end of his life, and just as we see beginning next week when he's giving his final speech to the Israelites, he is fearful of what will come of Bnei Israel when he's gone. Because time and time again, the minute they left Egypt, even before they left Egypt, but throughout their wandering in the Midbar, in the wilderness, they doubted God, they doubted Moses' leadership, and he spent his entire life bringing the Israelites along on this journey, and he fears that when he's not there to remind them of how to act, of what to do, that they will no longer follow his lead. And so we have, as I said, these curses that we race through, that we almost whisper through because it's so disturbing. But then we get to the end of the Parsha. If you want to open up to 1158, page 1158, this is the very beginning of chapter 29 of the book of Devarim. If there's a volunteer who will read nice and loud for us, thank you, Danny Siegel, for volunteering. Page 1158, nice and loud. Louder. Thank you. So we have this weird language that we see here. Twice we're told, first, atem ritem leinechem, that you have seen with your own eyes these miracles that God did for you. This is not the first time that Moses says that. And then we see only a verse later, Moshe says the same thing again. These miracles, asher ra'u einecha, that you saw with your own eyes, that is repeated the importance of the fact that you were witnesses to what happened. And then a verse later, but ad hayom hazeh, until this moment, lo natan Adonai lachem lev ladat, that you were not given a heart to truly know, to truly understand, the einechem lirot, and eyes to see, the oznayim lishmoa, right? So, until this day, you didn't have lev ladat, a heart to know, einayim lirot, eyes to see, oznayim lishmoa, and ears to hear. That it's this moment that you finally have this knowledge, this understanding of this brit, this covenant, which you've struggled to be in relationship with. But last verse, and the verse even before that, we're told, but you did see. You did see the miracles that happened. You did see these wonders that happened. They happened to you. You witnessed them with your very own eyes. What, if anything, stands out about these three verses? Bill. Say that louder. Right? Aren't the Israelites who saw these miracles no longer living? In fact, a whole book of the Torah ago, the middle of the book of Bamidbar, Parashat Shalach Lecha, we're told that these scouts, these spies, go out to explore this promised land that God has promised us. And because 10 of those 12 scouts return with a lack of faith in God. Only Caleb and Joshua come back with a belief that God will protect us as we enter this land. Because of that, we're told the entire generation of slaves, the entire generation with a slave mentality, except for Caleb and Joshua, need to die out. You can't enter the land of Israel with that slave mentality. So how can it say that you saw these with your own eyes as Moshe has taken the Israelites to the edge of the promised land? We know that it will be Joshua who will take them into the promised land. But when Moshe dies at the end of the book of Deuteronomy and is buried on top of Har Nevo, he's buried on top of this mountain that looks out to oversee the promised land, as if he's metaphorically watching over these same people. He never gets to take them into the land, but he continues to watch over them. They are on the edge of this land. And so, yes, right, it makes sense. Ibn Ezra has the same question. Well, he refuses to accept that the entire slave generation has died out, which is why they have not yet entered the land, acknowledges that they've been wandering for 40 years, and suggests, well, maybe it's other miracles, that we're going to throw all those other miracles into it as well. They experienced the miracle of man, the miracle of manna coming from heaven. They experienced the miracle of getting water from a rock. They experienced the miracle of turning bitter waters into sweet. So they experienced other miracles in the desert, even if they weren't the miracles of Egypt. But I think, Bill, you're spot on, right? That how can we be told you saw these miracles with your own eyes when you didn't? Anything else? Yeah, Barbara. Excellent, right? We say in the Haggadah, we say, B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et asmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. That in every generation, we ourselves are supposed to see ourselves as if we left Egypt. So, when it says, Atem ri'tem le'einechem, that you saw with your own eyes, even though those Israelites weren't there, we're in the same boat, right? We are not supposed to reenact Exodus. I learned from Rabbi Deborah Blank this term of anamnesis, that we are supposed to re-experience it, that the rituals of the Seder are meant to trigger our memories so that we remember that we too left Egypt. It's not as if we left Egypt, but it's that we are obligated to go through this so that we remember what it was like to actually leave Egypt. How then can we say with our own eyes if we too weren't there? Bill.
Seeing doesn't necessarily imply.
Nice. Seeing does not totally imply understanding, even if you saw it with your own eyes. The Israelites continue to doubt. They saw it with their own eyes, and then they get to the edge of the Sea of Reeds, and they say, we want to go back. And then they cross that split sea, and then they are hungry, and they are thirsty. And they wait for Moshe to come down the mountain, and they build themselves an idol. That they actually, who saw with their own eyes, didn't fully believe, didn't fully appreciate. And that's why a verse later it says, Ad hayom hazeh, until this day, you actually didn't fully see. You didn't fully hear. You didn't fully know. It's the same way that if you ever learn sign language, which we do in mini-minions sometimes, of the Shema, well, the ASL sign for here, for Shema, is this. You don't want to say Shema to a hearing impaired community. So the sign that they use instead is this. Because it's not really to hear, is not the command. It's not to listen, but it's to fully pay attention, to fully understand. So even if they saw with their own eyes, did they fully comprehend the miracles that they were seeing? Anybody else? Yeah, Michelle. So that's also a great point, that we're also told that all of us stood at the foot of Sinai from our ancestors to our descendants. So even, this goes back to what Barbara said, even if we weren't there, we were there and we experienced it with our own eyes. I think our challenge, ultimately, is exactly the challenge of the Israelites. The challenge that Moshe is facing, which is maybe why there was this tochacha, just to rebuke these curses, is that how do I get this people to sustain this covenant without experiencing the greatest of all miracles, right? The greatest of all miracles, so much so that we actually say we observe Shabbat because of that. We don't observe Shabbat because of creation. Every Friday night when we say Kiddush, we say we observe Shabbat as a way to thank God for Yetziat Mitzrayim, as a way to thank God for our freedom, for experiencing the Exodus. So Moses is saying, if those Israelites who left Egypt doubted God and doubted this covenant, I'm about to be God and leave this world, and I'm supposed to make sure that the legacy of this brit continues, all the more so these Israelites who didn't experience the greatest of all miracles, how are they going to sustain this? And that's the boat in some ways that we are in as well. We're in this time of Elul, we're supposed to be doing this cheshbon hanefesh, this accounting of our souls in preparation for renewing our covenants with God. That's ultimately what the Chagim are. In some ways, Yom Kippur is meant to mirror a Jewish wedding, and it's a renewal of vows between us and our partner, seeing God as a spousal relationship rather than a child and parent relationship. But we're stuck. How can we renew those vows? How can we strengthen that brit when we also didn't experience the split sea? And we also didn't experience manna from heaven. We also didn't experience the 10 plagues. And we also, I would say all the more so, regularly question our relationship with God, or God's place in this world, or God's presence, or where God is when our lives are consumed often on social media with doom scrolling the worst parts of this world. Climate crises, and illness, and disease, and hatred, and bigotry, and violence, and loss of life. And we're left wondering, how do we build that relationship? Because when it says, Atem ritem leinechem, that you saw with your own eyes, we didn't. And maybe even if we did, or we're supposed to see ourselves as if we did, we don't understand. It's funny, Rabbi Martin and I have the privilege every Friday morning of celebrating Shabbat with our Thelma K. Reisman preschoolers, and one of the things we do, we sing songs about God and how God is everywhere and ask them where they see God in that moment. And sometimes they'll look out the window and they'll say, I see God in the tree, or I see God in that squirrel. Or sometimes they'll be silly and they'll say, I'll see God in this chair. Or sometimes they'll be beautiful and say, I see God in my friend. And that pediatric idea of God is actually the most genuine and authentic idea of God. Seeing God everywhere and in everything. It's what exactly we tell our youngest of children, but it's what we struggle with ourselves. And that's the struggle that we face this time of year specifically. How do we respond to this notion that we saw these miracles with our own eyes? Part of it is striving to see the miracles in our own lives with our own eyes. Part of it is our goal to see God everywhere and in everything, and in doing so, not just see the parts of our lives that we struggle to accept, to understand, but see the beauty and the blessings every day, those everyday blessings that we may take for granted, just like the preschoolers who may see God in a tree, or may see God in a hug, may see God in a loving relationship, in a laugh, in a smile, for us to do the same thing. Because ad hayom hazeh, until this moment, that's what we say in Elul, it's until this moment we didn't understand. We acknowledge that actually in some ways we failed in this brit, in this covenant this past year, and our job is to repair this covenant, to strengthen this covenant and our role and relationship in this covenant in the year ahead. May we spend these coming weeks leading up to the new year doing chashbon hanefesh, not just accounting our own actions, but how we can strengthen this relationship so that when we stand panim el panim, face to face with God on Yom Hadin, on this day of judgments to come, we can say that we did see with our own eyes and did come to understand with our hearts and our minds and our eyes and our ears, that we witness miracles then, but also appreciate the miracles each and every day of our lives. Amen.